Welcome back, everyone. If you're thinking of starting an online business, then you're probably torn between starting a coaching business or an agency. So today, we're going to explore some of the biggest differences, advantages, and disadvantages of both. Now, before anything else, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe below, of course. But in any case, let's go ahead and jump right in to some of the biggest factors to consider when deciding between choosing a coaching or agency business. Now, the first factor to consider when deciding between a coaching or agency business is deciding your own role. Now, if you choose to go the coaching route, then this means that your role is more of the you do it or even the done with you role. On the other hand, of course, if you choose to go the agency route, then you're choosing the done for you route as opposed to the done with you route or something like that. So if you go the agency route, then you're pretty much taking on all the labor yourself. For the most part, yeah, you could leave a little bit of strategy to them, but you're the one or your team is doing all the labor. So the short story here is that as a coach, you are playing the teacher or advisor role, but as an agency, you are playing the executioner role. The next factor to consider are the deliverables that you will actually deliver to your end client. So if you are going the coaching route, then some of the things that they will expect are planning, strategy, execution, accountability, and things like that. However, on the agency side, like we've already touched on, you will mainly be dependent on for the actual execution of whatever is decided on. Now, yes, you may incorporate some strategy into that situation and into those deliverables, but ultimately, as a coach, you will be more relied upon for your strategy and guidance and support. But as an agency, you will be much more relied on for your actual execution of those tasks. The next factor to consider is your personal involvement. Now, if you are going the coaching route, then in most cases, this will actually involve a good amount of your own personal involvement, whether that be your marketing, your personal name, and things like that. Now, on the other hand, of course, if you go the agency route, then this is much more hands-off if you want to go that way. So just keep that in mind, that if you go the coaching route, this will usually involve more of your personal involvement. Now, yes, if you choose to convert this into a coaching program or a course or a group coaching program, then this can take a little bit less of your time. But in most cases, this will take much more time than if you go the agency route. The next factor to consider when deciding between a coaching or agency business is the price point at which you will sell your offer. So the short story here is that when it comes to coaching or consulting or any type of strategy-based deliverable, generally this has a much higher price point. So sticking with coaching, usually you can sell this for $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, literally as high as you want to go. Now, on the other hand, agency work, this tends to be usually at a lower price point, but it is usually much more scalable, which means that you can serve many more people even if at a lower price point. One more factor to consider here is that when it comes to coaching or consulting, usually these are one-time fees. Now, yes, you can make these recurring, but we'll just leave that aside for now. But when it comes to agency services, usually the rule here is that they are ongoing and recurring. The next factor to consider here is the relationship you will have with your client. Now, as a coach or consultant, you are essentially a peer,
you son of a bitch,
to your client. In other words, you can give them advice, you can tell them what to do in a way, I guess you could call it, and if they want to listen to you or not is kind of up to them. On the other hand, on the agency side, it's a little bit more of a top-down structure, which is when they are pretty much telling you what they want and you are delivering, let's just say taking orders. Now, I don't mean for that to sound negative, but just keep in mind that as a coach or consultant, you are generally regarded as a peer to your client, but as a agency service or provider, usually it's more of a top-down structure. The next factor to consider is the duration of your relationship. Now, when it comes to coaching or consulting, usually this is more of a finite relationship where there is an endpoint, although there are different business models. But on the agency side, it's much more ongoing, as we've already mentioned. Now, yes, of course, there are ongoing programs and business models if you go the coaching route, but in general, agency work tends to be much more conducive to the ongoing recurring model. The next factor to consider is who the driver of the relationship is. Now, on the coaching side, generally this tends to be a much more client-driven model or business type, which means that you give your advice, your suggestions, but ultimately they are the ones who actually have to do the work and take the action. Now, on the agency side, of course, this is where you and your team, you're the ones who actually have to do the things, buy the ads, do the SEO, build the website, and whatever else it might be. So to summarize again, is that coaching is more client-driven and that agency work or services are more vendor or provider driven. The next factor to consider is your branding. So as you might imagine, is that coaching is much more reliant on personal branding. So if you have Joe Smith coaching when it comes to audio coaching or singing or dancing or business coaching or whatever it might be, then that is much more dependent on you, your content, your voice, and things like that. On the other hand, agency work does tend to be a little bit more faceless, let's say. Now, yes, just like always, there's no clear-cut delineation between both as always. So for agency work, for example, yes, personal branding can help, and it usually does, but just keep in mind that when it comes to coaching, it is much more personal branding focused, whether that be your name, your marketing, your content, or whatever it might be. But on the agency side of things, usually you can separate yourself a bit more. The next factors to consider are the alternatives that your prospects or clients have if they choose to not work with you. So if you go the coaching route, what are some alternative routes that they can go? They can learn how to do the things themselves. They can buy a course to do it. They could go back to school. They could experiment on their own and things like that. On the other hand, when it comes to agency work, they have a few different options. So for example, instead of going with you, they could maybe choose a software to do that work for them. Or they could hire a contractor or full-time or part-time employee to do that for them, or they could also learn how to do it themselves. Now, in most cases, your prospect or client is not going to want to go with the alternatives, which is why they're talking with you in the first place. But it's important to at least know what those alternatives are. The next factor to consider when deciding between an agency and coaching business is the marketing required to get it off the ground and to grow. Now, on the coaching side, we've already mentioned that it will require generally more personal branding, which also means that it will usually require more content marketing, that it will have to be more ongoing, like more frequently, that it will have to be more varied, and just generally more different and more interesting. On the other hand, agency work usually tends to involve very different marketing channels. So for example, usually this is much more dependent on referrals, on OPA or other people's audiences. You can usually utilize more cold outreach, such as cold email, cold calling. So as always, all of these marketing channels can work for all of these options, but just keep in mind that when it comes to marketing your coaching, usually this involves more content, more personal branding, and more of a consistent basis, as opposed to agency work, which is usually more dependent on networking and referrals and things like that. The next factor to consider when deciding between a coaching or agency business is deciding the outsource-ability of that business. Now, when it comes to coaching, we've already talked about personal involvement before, but when it comes to coaching, usually this involves a lot of your personal time. Now, yes, you can build a team, you can hire closers and appointment setters and people to handle your group coaching calls and stuff like that, but in general, it will require much more of your personal time. On the other hand, agencies and agency work, of course, are much more outsourceable. In other words, your main job is to get prospects, get clients, book discovery calls, and beyond that front end, you can pretty much hire people to do the other 90 to 95% of the deliverables and of the business. And the absolute most important factor to consider when deciding between starting a coaching or agency business is to hit the like button and subscribe below. If you learned something interesting today, it does help a lot. What do you think about these consideration factors? Are there any I missed? Let us know in the comments below. Well, that wraps us up for today. Thanks everyone for stopping by, and I'll see you on the next one.